Welcome to Justice Counts, the podcast that goes beyond the law to what's important to you. Equal justice for all is a guidepost for our nation, but how do we achieve that? Here are your hosts, writer-commentator Bob Gaddy and novelist-attorney Mark M. Bello.
Hey guys, welcome to Justice Counts. Thanks for joining us today. Michelle Thompson, J.D., Ph.D., is the CEO of Resistant Vision Coaching and Consulting. She helps women lawyers and academics who work extreme hours to prove their prowess, build sustainable careers, and earn promotions and raises. Her approach is based on the belief that if you never set boundaries for yourself, you'll always be overworking, stuck on a hamster wheel of producing more results, and losing sleep because you're always worried about clients, jobs, or the next deadline, never mind tenure or making partner, and therefore not enjoying your life and building the community and connection you seek. With almost 3 decades in law and academia and over 5 years of experience as a professional coach, Michelle helps her clients achieve professional sanity with a variety of embodied techniques that combine left and right brain strategies, from emotional freedom technique to strategic planning.
Boy, I was listening to your intro, Bob, and we were just discussing this, the hamster wheel.
Yeah, for sure.
It's an interesting analogy to, I used to call it treading water. But Michelle, welcome. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah.
I'm so pleased to have
Thank
you
you
here because there are multiple definitions of justice and injustice. This show is all about justice and injustice. And one form of justice or injustice, how easily or how difficult it is for this person or that person to get into school, to build a resume, to build a career, to make it in the corporate or the legal world. So justice and injustice comes in many different forms, shapes, or sizes. Women, especially women of color, I sense, face far greater challenges than their male counterparts. I realize you didn't apply to law school or graduate school as a white male.
True.
And you can't directly compare experiences to, let's say, me or Bob. But can you tell us the specific challenges you faced getting into law school and or graduate school that white males, for example, don't face?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I love speaking to these topics. Um, so to complicate who I am, my parents are also not from the United States. They are immigrants, and so what my mom had the foresight to do was to put us in private. I went to the University of Chicago laboratory schools because she worked in the hospitals and clinics and got money off, and she figured that what she didn't know, we would pick up. Both intentionally and by osmosis in that system. But that means that I get the impression that there are many things that people pass on in families that I actually didn't have access to. And I was the oldest. I have a younger sister who actually we did interesting passing through the night kind of career moves that are very similar. So I was the first. I had no idea how to take standardized tests. My mom was always like, they're just testing what you know. You know the things, take the test, and that's actually not what standardized tests really do. And so that was like that, like off the bat, that was already a challenge for me in terms of actually getting into law school, getting into undergrad law school, and passing the bar eventually. But when you come from families, my mom went to nursing school in England, right? So she's in a different place, a different discipline. And actually she came out with a diploma grad. She actually didn't go through a 4-year institution. I certainly didn't know how to navigate that. And when I went to law school, I absolutely had not a clue on how to navigate it. And so I feel like there was just a lot of, there was no backup. There's no one to go to say, explain to me how I'm supposed to approach this at all. If I think about it, my sister, on the other hand, she had me, right? So when she went to law school, she came, there's one Thanksgiving, she came and she stayed with me and she's like, oh my God, they're finals. I don't know what to do, blah, 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 blah. And I said, sit down. And she looked at me funny and said, just sit down. And I said, contracts, offer, acceptance.
She went to law school after you
She
did?
did, yeah. And I just laid it out.
Why?
That's a good question. She actually went to she went to get a Ph.D. and that didn't work out for her. So she didn't tell me not to get the Ph.D. and I didn't tell her don't go to law school. So there we go. We're even.
Right.
But I sat her down and I said, offer, acceptance, consideration, any exceptions to those rules, and that's it. And she looked at me funny and I was like, that's contracts. And I did the same thing for torts. I did the same thing for criminal law. I just laid out like, this is it. This is how you analyze them. And she did far better in law school than I did. She got straight A's. I did not. That's all I have to say, right? Like I learned that was the approach to actually taking the coursework. After I took the bar exam, I was like, oh, that's what that was supposed to be, right? And I actually think that's actually the difference. Like there's just, the people I went to, the people I earned my PhD with who come from people who, their dads had PhDs, right? They understand how to approach these things. And I'm just jumping in them, making sense of them for myself. Does that answer your question? That's for me, there's no greasing the wheels. And I think for many of us who identify as non-white or often female, we don't come from families of people who can actually grease the skids. That's the expression. We don't come from families where people can lay out how to approach any of this stuff.
Seems like you were fortunate, though, with the family that you did come from. You got a lot of support, right?
Absolutely. I mean, people were excited. Everyone was thrilled. We're going to have a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
Everyone was absolutely thrilled with what I was doing. That in that way, they absolutely were.
Yeah. Did you feel though that because of your race, because of your gender, that you had more difficult time than otherwise you would have, let's say, if you were a white male?
And being in a Black body, right?
Yeah.
There's so few of us who have actually had access to these institutions in systematic ways, right? I think it's less than 5% of the people who are in law are Black, right? There are tons of lawyers, right? Like there's so few of us who are Black. And what that means is that we're learning about systems. Like, I mean, there are a lot of people who have interactions with the legal system, right? But we're not learning about these systems from the perspective of how to make it work for me. We're just trying to avoid them, right? Like, that's a very, very different point of view. And so we don't what race and sex actually end up doing is it keeps generations of us out of these systems. So we don't, when we go to law school, when we do these programs, we don't know how to navigate these programs in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it is. And people don't want to help you in the program because it's just like, but I don't want you to get a better score than me because I want the job at fill in the blank law firm, right? Like, like I don't want you to be a competitor. So people aren't necessarily going to say, let me give you a hand. You look like you're completely puzzled.
Were there cultural, economic, geographical, financial barriers to getting into to school?
So my mom had I can speak for myself and then I'll go more meta. But for my mom, she made a decision that she didn't want us to be in debt for undergrad, right? She figured like you do the other degrees, you'll get jobs that can pay back that debt. But like for undergrad, let's not do that. So I didn't personally have that disadvantage, right? And like I got a financial aid package that made sure that I wasn't actually in debt after my undergrad. For law school, so I went to University of Iowa. And at the time I went, they were in the middle of Iowa, right? So they were really working to figure out how to pull in more BIPOC folk into University of Iowa. And it's the first time I'd actually gone to school with Latinos and indigenous people. That was actually a very different experience for me. And they had aggressive financial aid packages for us as a result, right? I paid in state tuition. that was like 3,000 at 3,000 a year at the time, right? That's unheard of. But I paid in-state tuition to go to the University of Iowa. And the cost of living was very low, right? So the finances weren't the barrier. For me, it was, I don't know if it was, I mean, it was a barrier in that the whole system seemed like, how do I approach summarizing the system, be it contracts or torts or corporations or whatever? How do I approach this so that I can systematically understand how to manage these exams? That's what baffled me. That's completely what baffled me. And my classmates weren't happy to help. It wasn't just me, but anybody, because if you got an A, that might mean that you'll get a job that I want to get. So that was the barrier for me. I do think for many of us who end up graduating from law schools, we are in, like, we have so much debt by the time that we're done, is that we might get you are, my sister had so much debt, she went into big law. And for her, the barriers, I did public interest work, so the barriers they didn't look the same way. But for her, like, she's a large woman, and people made assumptions about what she could do based on her size and also based on her race, and often wouldn't give her the right assignments, wouldn't, connect her with partners who could move her career forward. She took it on the chin in profound ways, and she had to do it for years because she had to navigate paying back her student loans. Um, and so, like, how you might craft a career is very different because you have debt significant debt to grapple with, and you're carrying the stress of that as you're trying to learn how to practice law with people who are like, yeah, we got you here, but we're not sure we're going to keep you here. We don't really want to do that. We don't have any commitment to doing that.
Well, after you got out of school and moved on with your professional career, did you experience any similar resistance that you described that your sister faced?
I did public interest work,
Yeah,
and so my first job was actually working. It was in DC, and it was with an organization called Whitman Walker Clinic. It was at the time where where we're talking about COVID today, but at the time it was all AIDS all the time, and I was actually helping to provide legal services to people in Anacostia, which at the time did not have a Whole Foods. It was a food desert, and 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 the HIV epidemic was hard there because people were catching the disease and they didn't have what they need set up. So I didn't face those particular kinds of barriers. After my fellowship ended at Women Walker Clinic, I worked for a local Service Employees International Union, which represented Black healthcare workers, and I was bargaining collective bargaining agreements. So my employers were, I never faced that with my employers.
uh-huh.
Actually, like when I worked with the union, they were so excited to have me. They were
Sure.
like, "Oh my God, you could be a role model for people." And it's like, okay, like, don't push it. I'm in my late 20s.
Yeah, yeah,
Let's not get crazy. I'm young.
right.
It was a very different experience than my sister had. But again, that was because of the decision of what kind of law I went into, and my debt was no, I didn't have a debt burden anywhere near what my sister had at that point.
Right.
Not even close.
So
Yeah.
you're a lawyer. You have your first job. You're now in a position to climb the ladder. Are there fundamental challenge differences between women and men in starting and climbing the ladder to success in the practice of law?
Yes, I will never forget when I was doing, there was a multi-city in DC collective bargaining agreement that was up for negotiations, and the people who were doing most of these negotiations were the male presidents of the local. The president of my local thought, Michelle's got this, off you pop. um I I actually knew, I had read the proposals, and so, I came to the table prepared. I knew what the proposals were. I knew where we should go. I knew, like, how if we organize workers to do this, that, and the other thing, we could have these major successes. And every single time I tried to bring this up with the other union leaders, they would ignore me because I was a 29, 30, 31-year-old woman. Who cares? You don't know how to run a labor union. I'm like, yeah, but I'm a lawyer.
Well, the fact that you were a 29, 30-year-old African American woman.
They were all black as well, right? It was very much because I was a young woman
Okay.
that I was being treated that. Like I was very clear about that. This was
Okay. So
this was sexism flapping in the wind. Just like very, very clear. Like we are not going to, take on what you say. And there was a point where we actually had to appeal. We actually went to hearing about something, and we all had to prepare briefs for the hearings and stuff like that. And I prepared my brief, I submitted it, and the people in the law firms were like, "That was good. we don't have an argument against what you said." I'm like, "No, you don't at all." Right? And I was very confident in that, but it was after that the presidents of locals they took a different look at me. They realized there was clearly something I understood.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any regrets? Would you have done anything differently?
Absolutely not.
What would you tell young Michelle Thompson if she was applying in 2022 and beyond?
Oh wow! If I did this, if I could tell me then what I know now, I would have had.
We're giving you a do-over. We're giving you a do-over, Michelle. What?
I'm getting a do-over. Yes. I would have that conversation I had with my sister at Thanksgiving. This is how you're going to take on your exams, and this is how you can find the resources to do it and make it happen. And this is how you're going to save time doing it. I would also tell her, by the time I was 5 years into the union, I was drinking more than I would want to. I was smoking and I was eating McDonald's all the time because I was driving to different bargaining tables, like between Baltimore, Annapolis, and Washington, D.C. And I would also talk to her about taking care of herself. Like, you have to make sure that you're eating properly. You have to, drink your water. Like, you can't live like this. You're headed for a heart attack. If you want to do this for any period of time, you have to take care of yourself better than this. Those are probably the two most important things I would tell her. I would also tell her, you've got a good head on your shoulders. You're smart, and sexism's real. Like, people really will dismiss what you think, what you say, because you're female, and it doesn't mean that you back off of that. It doesn't mean that you don't have to shirk in the face of that. Just keep going, keep showing up. It will shift. It's going to take time and it's going to be hard, but you can do that.
Are there cultural biases in the bar exam, Michelle?
I think the biases are how people are told about and trained to take tests. Like this whole approach that if you don't come from a family that is really rigorously trained in how to take standardized tests, you really think that they're really there to test on what you know. And that's actually not the case. So my son is 18. He's headed to college in a minute. He's 17 and headed to college in a minute. He'll be 18 in June. And he has always done unbelievably well at standardized tests. Why, you ask? Because he had me. Because I knew, I was telling my spouse, I said, this is a game. Like, we actually have to figure out, and no one wants to hear this, but you have to figure out how to play the standardized test game.
Uh-huh.
And once you figure out that game, it applies to all of the tests, right? So I live in New York City. District 2 in New York City is like the best. If you're living in Manhattan, that is the best district to be in. They have the best schools, blah, 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 blah. And there's one school that is citywide, and you have to test to get into that. And that's not in the regular public school system, but in another system that everyone wants to go to, right? So, when he was little, we tried to prep him for the gifted and talented test, and it didn't go well. And I looked at my partner and said, we're being outmanned and outgunned, right? There are people who are spending tens of thousands of dollars prepping their kids for these tests so they can get into these schools, and we're trying to do it ourselves. We can't do that, right? So I immediately, we called in a company. I said, train him, prep him how to do this. My son, after that, killed every single, he killed it on every single standardized test. He took that test. He missed like 2 questions. Years later, he said, I want to take the test to go to Hunter. I'm like, that's fine. I'm not going to pay to have you train for that, but you can do that. He got in. It was like, and he beat out classmates of his who, again, tens of thousands of dollars have been poured into them to pass this test to get into Hunter. he did it, right? And I think like he just has he was raised with a very, very different sense of how to take these tests. Um, and in the, perhaps there are biases, but if you're actually trained to take them, if you're actually shown how to take them, you can navigate the biases with ease, right? You know that when you see that particular question, that foil is a wrong answer. When you see something set up this way, you know, do this, right? Like there are these very particular things that you're taught and told how to do it, that actually make it navigable. It's just that people, like a lot of people who are black and brown, don't have money for that kind of training for those kinds of tests, and so they never learn how to do it. And it's like it's a skill. It's not inherent. It's a skill, and you it's a skill that you can learn and you can do. My son did very little prep for the SATs. He did very well on them. He did ridiculous. People were like, "What?" I'm like, yeah, well, that's James. But he knows how to take tests.
Bob, I obviously can't speak as a black female, but but I but to your question, I think I think that the bar exam is less of an issue culturally than the SAT or the high school experience versus the college experience versus the law school experience.
Absolutely.
Law school is kind of consistent whether you go to Harvard or whether you go to the worst law school in America.
It's true.
The
That is very
curriculum
true.
is kind of the same. So when you get out of law school trains you to pass the bar exam.
Or does it?
It actually is. It doesn't train you to be a lawyer. It trains you to pass the bar exam. Or at least it's supposed to. Anyway, but my point is that the SAT people are coming from way so many different um, cultures and religions and neighborhoods and economic circumstances, whereas law school graduates are basically coming from the same curriculum result, and
I will
and
say this, though.
I
I
think
think
that
there's something to be said for
kind
that.
of evens
Yeah.
up the biased issue a little bit, but um,
I will say this. I flunked the Illinois bar the first time I took it. I'll cop to that, right? I didn't
mhm.
pass it. I did pass the DC bar, but a friend of a friend actually came up to me and he actually said, okay, this is how you're going to prepare for the bar. So how was I preparing for the bar? I was I was reading all of the big case materials and trying to remember them. And it turns out that's actually not how you prepare for the bar, right? You prepare for the bar by practicing the pet questions and pretty much only practicing the questions. You're right in that law school, and because I'd gone to law school, I already knew the content, right? But I'm sitting here prepping content, and it's like that's not a test. That's not the test taking skill. That's like, how do you approach the questions? How do you see patterns in the questions and answer those questions? So when I go to take the GRE years later, a decade later, almost a decade later, 7 years later, I took a practice test that showed I was a complete moron and would never get a PhD. All right, and I figured that. It's like, of course, I've been out of my game for a while. I used the exact same approach that I used to take the bar exam the second time, to take the GREs, and I blew the GREs out of the water.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I mean, there is, and it actually doesn't matter what that test is. There are approaches to taking the test. And I really do think for black and brown people, and often for many people who identify as female, that's the challenge with this stuff. Like, how do you take the test? It's not that you don't know the stuff. You know the stuff,
Right.
right? You know how to read. You know it, but like, how do you actually approach taking the test? What my son did to get into Hunter, it's the same thing that I take for the GRE. It's the same thing. If I had to sit for the New York bar right now, I hope to God I don't. But if I had to do it right now, I know exactly how I would prepare.
Well, there's also
and I would pass it. I'm like 500% confident I would pass
there's
it.
also a tremendous amount of anxiety going in that you've got to overcome as well. But
Absolutely.
very few white males, very few white females, very few black males, very few black females have dual degrees in law and a
Hmm.
PhD. So you're unique
Hmm.
in any race, creed, or culture.
That's
in
true.
having accomplished that, you now use both degrees, as I understand it, to help women climb the legal or corporate ladder. Um, and we'll
Mhm.
talk about more. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But I'm curious. Two questions. You practiced law at one point. Did you enjoy it? And what caused you to make the transition from practicing lawyer to someone who now counsels lawyers? I presume some of it is related to your second degree, your
Mhm.
Ph.D., but what caused you to do that?
So I met my
First, did you enjoy practicing law? Did you like
I
it?
actually did. I always loved my work. I
Okay.
never woke up thinking, why am I doing this? I never had that thought. Now, was I anxious? Yes. Did I want to get it right? Yes. I there was all of that. That seems to be part and parcel of practicing law. However, by the time I left, I knew I wanted to be a mother, and I couldn't figure out how I was going to do this job, driving all over the place, you know, late nights bargaining and have a child at the same time. That just didn't seem doable. um and what did seem like I was going to have was a heart attack, and it's like, okay, this isn't going to work. So my spouse met me and said, you could get a doctorate. It was not on my list of things to do in this life. I was like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And I kind of I took that to heart. And my mother's side of the family is from northeastern Jamaica, which is home to one of a runaway slave community called Maroons. And that kind of had been dancing around in my head, and I decided, you know what, I'll get a doctorate in history, because it would be interesting to go.
Everybody feels that way, don't they? I
Yeah,
mean,
it's very rare.
I've just gone through 7 years of higher education.
I'll do more.
I think I'll go
Right.
to school for another.
I
You're crazy,
I
lady.
am. I am. But I was also. I'm still very driven by this project. But I was. But that's the level of drive I have. Is like, I want to tackle that. So I applied. I got in. I was in my graduate program, in 2008, when the market went south, and the jobs were precious and rare, by the time I graduated. So I worked as a part-time professor, which pays little or nothing, um, for a while, and I actually became suicidal because I'm trying to figure out, like, how am I going to pay my bills? I actually, like, I can't, like, make the basic things happen. I'm lucky I could pay to get to these places to teach. Um, and I looked at my son, who was 8 or 9 at the time, and as I looked at him, I I was like, you can't check out. That's actually not going to work. That's not going to be good for him. And I tried journalism for a while. It was kind of the same way as academia. And I've been part of a peer counseling organization, a volunteer peer counseling organization, for years. And I thought, wow, I wish I could take the skills that I've learned there, because I transform people's lives in that context. I wish I could take that and actually get paid for it. And I opened my email, and in my email was, there's a scholarship to learn how to become a coach. And I said, I'm not entirely sure I know what a coach does, but I think that's what I'm looking for. I got the scholarship, I got the training, and I never looked back. And that's how I actually pivoted from being a full-time academic to actually setting up a coaching practice. And I decided to set up a coaching practice because I've been people act like academics and lawyers do two completely, I mean, they do completely different things, but their lives are completely different, and they're not. As someone is going up for partner, is it's a lot the same stresses as somebody who's going up for tenure on the tenure track. And I knew I had a lot I could bring to both groups. I mean, yes, people don't think of themselves in the same pot, but I knew I could bring a lot to the people doing both of these kinds of things, and that's why I opened my coaching practice. And that was the connection. I also still, I mean, yes, I went and I earned a doctorate in history, but so much of what I write about and so much of my research is actually based in how it's based in law. I never thought I'd like property law. This is what animates the stuff that I write about now as a scholar. Um, I, I do a lot of statutory analysis on what I do, because it actually makes sense of, like, what's happening in this particular period of time. It's a skill that I can bring to the table because I was a lawyer, and that animates how I do my historical work.
Well, you moved into your practice. You had a son. What? He was 8 or 9. Did you say? Yeah. Uh, that was a situation where you had to balance your family life, your professional life, and all of that work-life balance. It's harder for a woman, I think, than it is for a man too.
Absolutely.
Just even though things are
Yeah,
changing, they haven't changed that
that's
much
true.
in that respect. So, at any rate, I'm wondering in your work now, do you help women with that balance that you had to experience?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is, I actually was talking to a client yesterday who's actually leaving Big Law and going in house. And I said, like, so you don't replicate the conditions under which you work, because you could just take the same habits and bring them somewhere else and you're going to still hate your job because you're doing the same thing. I said, what are the things that actually matter to you in this world? Like, what is it that you want to be able to do? What does your income actually allow you to be able to do that you're going to make a point of doing now that you're no longer in Big Law? And she really, I made her get really, really granular about, like, what does your day look like? What does your weekend look like? What do things look like in 5 years? Because you're going to actually put your life and your health first. Her things were so bad for her that she had tachycardia, right? That's how anxious she got, like really high blood pressure and tachycardia. I've had clients on the academic side who have been hospital. They would go to the hospital. They've gotten so anxious, right? And this is, it's not how much time you sit down and write. Actually, the less time you spend writing, the better, because that way you're making sure you're getting sleep, that you're eating well, that you're exercising, so that you're actually, your brain can function well and you can write well. You can do more with less time. That is actually the key, and those are the ways. So much of what I do with women is like, put yourself first. Like, you have to put yourself first, because if you don't have you, none of this work is going to get done, right?
Yeah,
And we call it work life balance, but like, really, it's like, if you are going to practice law, if you are going to get tenure, you can't be in the hospital sick on an IV because you're both anxious and on the verge of having a heart attack. That's not workable.
yeah,
So you've got these dual degrees,
Hmm.
and I presume that a lightning bolt hit you, and you said, "I think I'll use both degrees and create a business." And you created a business called Resistant Vision Coaching and Consulting,
Yeah.
and that gives you the opportunity to use both degrees in practice. How do you use your dual training to coach lawyers, and what does your coaching process look like?
What I am able to do, I mean, what as a lawyer, when I'm working with lawyers, I'm very much able to hone in on, like, what their day-to-day work life looks like, right? I know what it is, like the phone's ringing before you even get in the car to go to the office or whatever we're doing. Like, you roll out of bed and here you go, right? um like, I don't necessarily know their area of law. Don't come to me because you want me to talk to your specific area of law. You need a mentor for that. But like, I can relate to, like, what that workday looks like and how to set it up, so you're setting up the boundaries to make that happen. When I work with clients, there are three important parts that need to happen, right? They need to, like, the first part I do is to provide comfort, and I don't mean like that they're there now. I really mean it in the way of, so I'll get a little bit into the neuroscience of what I do. The amygdala is the part of the brain that we often call the lizard brain. And everything that happens in our brain before we get to the higher analytical parts goes through the amygdala. And that's the fight, flight, or freeze part of our brain, right? So, what I actually work with clients and doing is to actually, that's what emotional freedom technique does. You're literally tapping on acupuncture points and doing the emotional acupuncture without the needles, so that you can actually calm that part of the brain, so you actually can make thoughtful and reasoned decisions about what you're doing and why you're doing it, right? So that's the first part of what we do. I provide that comfort for your actual, for your actual, your body and your brain, to make sure that you're not just operating completely out of fear. The next part we do is clarify. And what we're doing when we're clarifying is setting goals and setting the steps to make those goals. And you don't want to do that out of a state of, like, oh my gosh, everyone's I'm going to get fired tomorrow if I don't, right? Like that's not this. That's why the comfort part is so important first. Then we do commitment. Like you actually take the steps and see how they're going. If the steps are wrong, we revamp them and then we try again. And so it's comfort, clarify, and commit. Those are the three. Those are the three major steps that we take that I take when I'm working with people. When we take those steps, people get confidence, right? They're now like, oh, okay, this is awesome. I can do this. They have a clear direction in which they can go. They're clear about the steps they're going to take. And they can set boundaries with people because they can say, I'm trying to do this. When you're asking me to do that, it gets in my way and I can't actually do it. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yep. Are you enjoying what you're doing?
Yeah.
Compare.
I love what I do.
All right. Compare your law practice
Mhm.
to your consulting practice. Which do you like better and why?
Whew. I prefer my consulting practice. I never thought I would ever own a business and do this, but um, because I just got off the phone with a lawyer who's writing a book about history. So I actually got to talk to her about how to set up her workday, and I got to get into the particulars about how to set up her book. That's so exciting! I absolutely love it, and the stuff that she does completely corresponded to my own academic work, right? So we could actually talk as peers about how to do this. I absolutely love it. It lights me up. I love talking to people about how to write their books. I love talking to lawyers and actually watching them go, okay, I feel better. I don't feel anxious. Tomorrow I'm going to do this. And like you can see, like they sound different. They look different at the end of, like, I see transformation like that. Like the speed at which I see people transform is amazing. And that's priceless. I could go to the bargaining table for years and not make any progress, but this is amazing.
Bob's thinking, Mark, you should have talked to her before you wrote all those books. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Now you know.
Anyway, hey, Michelle, you know what? You talked around this a little bit, but you use in your bio the term professional sanity, that's what you help your clients achieve. What is it?
It is being able to drive your career in the direction that you want it to go and not saying yes to people all the time because you think it's the way that you want to do it, and then you've got too much on your plate and you can't do any of the things well, right? So
Mhm.
when I'm working with like for example, like this my client yesterday, right? It's like we are actually going to sit down and plan your life outside of work so that you can keep that in mind, so that you know that you go to work at 9, you are done at 6, and you're going to attend to the things that you absolutely love about your life. That's professional sanity. What she had before was wake up in the morning, what did the partner say? Okay, I'm going to go do that. Wow, we have a deal. I'll be up from 2 a.m. till 6 a.m. and then I'm going to go back to the office because I have to work on the next one, right? That was not sanity, and that was not a life that was driven the way that she wanted it to happen. um, Professional sanity is, yes, you have to get tenure, you have to have this many publications. How are we actually going to set up a plan so that you actually move your work along, so that you're doing it all along, and you're not taking service, that you're not sitting on the this committee and the that committee and the other committee, taking on 50 students to advise and teaching, so you don't actually have the time to write your work.
Mhm. Okay.
And writing can't only be it.
Bob Getty and I are definitely professionally insane. We need you to fix us. How do you do that?
So the first part is actually to make sure that you're not setting up your life based out of complete anxiety and fight or flight driven work, right? So that's the first thing I would do with you. Then I'd say, well, what are your goals? What are the goals that you're trying to make? And probably sit down with you to say, like, what are the things outside of work that you really want to make sure that you're doing? And let's make sure that we make those a priority so that they get time in your calendar. And then we would go ahead and commit to taking those steps to do it.
I feel so much better.
Yeah, I do too. All of a sudden, I feel sane. I feel professionally sane. What do you think, Mark?
I don't know. I don't know. You'll have to ask my wife.
She'll have a lot to say about that.
Well, my wife tells me you're supposed to be retired. What the hell are you doing all this stuff for?
Exactly. Michelle,
I
we're almost out of time. You have anything you want to say to wrap up?
I think the goal, like when I work with people, like if you're definitely, if you're interested in practicing law, you're
You have,
practicing law now. The goal is to actually figure out what is it that you wanted from your life when you decided you wanted to practice law, because that's the thing that you actually need to pay attention to. Otherwise, the practice of law will subsume all of that. Like it'll take it's not that's not a horrible thing, but if that's not where you want to put your attention, that's how you have to shift it. And I guess I should put in the chat, I have a tool that you can go ahead and take advantage of, to, if nothing else, take a brief pause in the workday.
how does a prospective client reach you?
If you can find me by going to resistantvision.com, RESISTIANT all one word.com. Or you can find me on Twitter at Thompson for Michelle Dion Thompson. And you can find me on Instagram at resistant_vision.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn. There's a lot of places you can find me.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for being here.
I am
Thanks for
all
being
over
here.
place.
This has been
Oh,
fascinating.
you're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Robert?
we appreciate you being with us today, Michelle. It was really interesting, and I hope that we can help. You can help some of our listeners become more professionally sane.
You guys like that? Yes.
I know. Anyway, so
She gave me a creative writer link. I'm all set now.
yeah. Hey, you guys, if you haven't done so already, you need to check out Mark Bellows' Ripped from the Headlines Legal Thrillers. All of them are available at Amazon, online at Amazon and at other major online booksellers. Mark has quite the hero in attorney Zachary Blake. I think that this guy is who Mark wishes he had been. But anyway, we won't go there. Anyway, Blake fights for justice on all fronts. His books are Betrayal of Faith, Betrayal of Justice, Betrayal in Blue, Betrayal in Black, Betrayal High, Supreme Betrayal, Betrayal at the Border, and his latest, You Have the Right to Remain Silent. For more information, just check out markmbello.com. Now, until next time, this is Bob Gaddy from Mark Bellows signing off for Justice Counts.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Absolutely not. Oh wow, if I did this, if I could tell me then what I know now, I would have had. I'm getting a do-over. Yes. I actually, I would have that conversation I had with my sister at Thanksgiving. This is how you're going to take on your exams, um, and this is how you can find the resources to do it and make it happen. And this is how you're going to save time doing it. I would, I would also tell her by the time I was 5 years into the union, I was drinking more than I would want to. I was smoking and I was eating McDonald's all the time because I was driving to different bargaining tables, like between Baltimore, Annapolis, and Washington, D.C. Absolutely. I mean, people were excited. I mean, everyone was thrilled. We're going to have a lawyer, right? Everyone was absolutely thrilled with what I was doing. That in that way, they absolutely were.